Welcome back to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Jim Fitzgerald, also known as Fitz. Fitz, how are you tonight?
I am doing well, and I'm looking forward to your introduction of our guest. It's going to be a little bit different for Cold Red, but as we'll learn, James Keenan comes highly recommended. So, Ray, tell us a little bit about him, and we'll start talking about all those funny things we've been seeing in the sky.
Well, today we're going to shift our investigative lens from modern crime scenes to ancient mysteries. And we're going to try and connect last month's historic military UAP disclosures with the physical evidence left behind by ancient civilizations, which is the first time I've heard this. But Jim is going to explain that to us. So, Jim, why don't you, the best person that can introduce you is you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how the heck did you get involved in this stuff?
And let me start real quick. UAP is unidentified aerial phenomenon. It's kind of the new, I guess, initialism for UFOs. So just so our audience knows up front what we're talking about, James Keenan, it's all yours.
Sure. So many moons ago, I started out in law enforcement with the El Paso Police Department. Then I ended up going into private for a while, doing a lot of special investigations for insurance companies, working some major fraud rings in the New York City area. Got back into law enforcement with the Bureau of Investigations for the Ventura County District Attorney's Office in California. Earned a couple degrees in interdisciplinary studies in anthropology and archaeology, because as you know, the investigation is the same. It's just different subject matter, basically. Still using the same thing, just looking into ancient history instead of criminal or civil investigations. And I did that for 25 years. And then one day I woke up and I said, I'm sick and tired of investigating the crap that no one else wants to see in this world. And I said, I believe I'm going to do what I wanted to do out of the university. And that was look into the supernatural and religious belief systems of these ancient cultures and civilizations, because the paradigm that we currently have with history doesn't seem to fit. And the more that we're advancing into the future, we're starting to find the architecture and these sites that completely change the paradigm that we have. And we're shifting to a much more ancient history of Homo sapien. And it even looks like there may have been an impact by NHI, non-human intelligence. And having come from a criminal background, it's hard to come to terms with what that definition is or what those possibilities are. So here I am, I'm trying to merge the two. I try to keep a scientific background with the investigation, but at the same time, what's occurred can only lead me to believe that there's a consciousness that we don't quite understand that's also involved in it at this point.
Let me ask you, what investigative skills from your days in policing have proven to be the most valuable to you in your archaeology and in your search for non-humans, as they might call them?
Sure. So most important is provenience and provenance. When you're talking about criminal investigation, it's care, custody, and control of the evidence you're pulling out, whether that be artifacts, oral traditions, interviews with people from those cultures. It's keeping the data correct and also with the technology. So I've altered the technology. One of my biggest new tools is a radar gun that operates at a certain 24 plus gigabytes. And instead of, catching individuals that are speeding down the highway, I'm now able to see if I'm looking at an unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP, that is a physical, tangible item, or if it's some type of light phenomena. So it's that care, custody, and control and the use of technology and be able to collect data points that both the scientific individuals can understand and the people that are more into this consciousness or believe that non-human intelligence is involved.
Very interesting. Yeah, there's been a lot of Netflix specials and I guess HBO, whenever you want to look at it. And I said something earlier. It is UAP is unidentified anomalous phenomenon. That is what the actual initialism is. That I guess our military or someone maybe 5, 10 years ago decided to go from UFO for whatever connotations that still held. But I suppose it's not always flying. There's rumors of things in the ocean, and especially the Indian Ocean and the South Pacific, and I think even South Atlantic areas that really aren't that well traversed. And so now it's just anomalous, which means above ground, underwater, conceivably underground. I'm not sure about that, but there's a lot of stuff going on. Military pilots and commercial pilots now not being hesitant to come forward and say what they've seen, and they actually have videos of some of these gravity and propulsion defying, we'll just call them crafts or phenomenon, that just can't be explained. The way they zig and zag and cut and stop, and there's I think it's pretty safe to say there's something going on out there, and I'm glad, James, you're the first one on Cold Red to bring it that. And I've also been studying a little bit of the past, and maybe this is premature, but if you want to get into it, something happened 12,200 years ago. Are you familiar with this? The Younger Dryas, and that seems to have been some sort of a benchmark in the paradigm which you used when things sort of changed in on the world. And if you're comfortable, can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So what you're talking about was in the Younger Dryas system. It was like this break from the Ice Age to our current epoch, which is the Holocene period. And when you look at the geology and geography, we're starting to find anomalous material in the rock and the ground that appears to show some type of cataclysmic event occurring. And then when you look into the history, the oral tradition of anywhere in the world, we have what appears to be ancient history and stories of at least 4 different cataclysmic events occurring. And the last one that, most people are aware of is the Great Deluge. Whether you look at the Bible as a historical data, it's in there, or if it comes from an even more ancient Sumerian text, we have that as well. And we seem to see that instead of everything occurring after this event, the husbandry, the use of agriculture and animals to a greater degree, and then this explosion from miniature cultures to great civilizations, we actually appear to have had it before that. And there's just a loss of this history due to the evidence being buried. And that burying could be natural, meaning, underwater now because the water levels are greater than what they used to be, or due to faults and volcanic activity. And also what other people don't think about is from loss of history intentionally on purpose, or that these artifacts go into private collections and we're just not aware of it. So we have this loss of history for our race, our species being even older and possibly having had, some people say there was a manipulation that took place by an unknown species or non-known intelligence, or maybe we were, we're intelligent individuals and we've always been curious. We've always been able to invent and create. We've just lost that identity and all those artifacts, because if you look at the current way that we live, everything is in wood. Wood would be destroyed and gone. There wouldn't be much left unless it was in stone. And these artifacts and these buildings that we're finding that do point towards a greater history are made of stone.
You have. Go ahead, Jim.
Just real quick, and I think as to exemplify that, or a manifestation of that, are these pyramids built in different parts of the world that the technology still can't be explained. And certainly Egypt, certainly South America, Central America, other parts of, I believe, Asia. And it's without heavy lifting equipment, of course, everyone knows that back then. It seems like the technology is relatively similar, thousands of miles apart, tens of thousands of miles apart, going back, 5,000 years, if not longer. How can we explain that? And I'm just trying to follow up on what you just happened to say, James. And Ray, did your question kind of tie into that? And
I was going to go into that, but the other thing I wanted to know is, I'm sure the audience wants to know. Recently, what's the big hoopla here? We're hearing more government acknowledgement of these UAP encounters than ever before. What's your reaction to that about these recent disclosures?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, it's a bit underwhelming. It's a good thing that we seem to have finally some type of what people have been labeling as disclosure to a greater degree. But then at the same time, when you look at what is being released, there's no smoking gun in regards to like extraterrestrial life or for like this alien type of technology that I think everybody is really hopeful that comes out, and it's just not happening. And there were two separate dumps, one on May 8th and one on May 22nd. And you're right. I mean, there were 160 plus government agencies that took place in dumping those files. And then on the 22nd, there were over 60 videos showing a lot of this UAP activity. But unfortunately, when you dig down into the weeds, there's just nothing that was really that was going to open and change, make a paradigm shift or scare the public, if that's what the government believes is going to occur. It just wasn't there.
Well, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just wasn't in these
Right.
files released so far.
Jim, I think I can say this, and I think I can include you in this. In all my time in the Bureau, we never heard anything about any extraterrestrial UFOs, UAPs, call them what you want. We never heard anything about that. Nobody ever shared any information about that. Hey, look at this. I didn't hear anything about it. So I guess the question I have for you, Jim, what's the strongest piece of evidence that makes you think there's more to this story than just a coincidence?
Yeah. So you're talking about from the current data dump, correct? What came out of that?
Yeah. Or what you know separately from that, Jim.
Thank you for asking, because that's where I'm going.
Okay.
There were these congressional hearings before this data dump, and it kind of brought us to this point. We had a lot of people in the defense committees that were really asking harder questions that had been asked before. And there was a specific incident that occurred. A naval pilot, Ryan Graves, brought this out during the hearings, and it was from a military police at what used to be Vandenberg Air Force Base, which is now the space base in Lompoc, California. And it was interesting. They had a 2003 UAP. It was a red square the size of a football field that came over the base at missile launch sites, and Boeing contractors freaked out. I mean, this thing was coming low enough to where it scared them. The military police on duty got involved. At a later point, the MP stated that more than likely the exact same object came out from toward the ocean, which would have been from west to east, and came so close to them that they were having to almost duck and cover to get away from this object. And then it, in tremendous speeds, advanced towards Los Padres National Forest eastward. And it's interesting because one of my largest ways of looking into the history, including this anomalous history of the past, is through petroglyphs and pictographs. And we have the Chumash that lived in that area. We know that they've been there for 17,000 plus years. So they're one of the oldest cultures that we're aware of today. And they have the most amazing pictographs all the way from the ocean all the way towards what now is the Edwards Air Force Base area. And it shows these same like objects that they described in 2003 occurring in the past. That for me was really important, because if I'm looking for patterns, now I have patterns that go back thousands of years. And then we look at these, you had said that these submersible objects, these USOs, underwater submersible objects, are part of the UAPs. Well, where are we seeing a majority of them? They're off of the Channel Islands, which just happens to be in the Santa Barbara, Ventura, California area. And our submarines are coming in contact with these at a tremendous rate. And they're coming up out of the water, entering and exiting without any type of friction, being created at velocities that are impossible in our current technology. And now it appears that we weren't the only time frame that saw this. So that was the most important thing to me, because if I'm looking back for evidence of routes, I'm hoping to be able to track where these objects are going and coming from. And their story matches exactly with the Chumash history from the past. So that's my next project, is to be out at the Channel Islands and start videoing that, and then following all these pictograph sites and seeing if they do indeed fit this 2003 story.
Looking, and from what I understand, from what I'm hearing from you, is that there's a lot of similarities of these instances that is occurring on different continents. And I guess my question is, and I'm sure our audience wants to know, what is the most striking similarity about all these things that are occurring all over the place?
Yeah, I think the similarities are, and this is what's interesting, when you look at the data being released, I don't think everything is necessarily a physical, tangible object. And, I've been out and worked at Skinwalker Ranch before, which is where we had the OSAP program taking place, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program, that the government funded, the DoD funded at $22 million, Bigelow Aerospace and his team. And when you look at the history, when it came out in the books like Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, they discuss these 13 or 14 identifiable objectives that they presented to the DoD on what they wanted to accomplish. And the DoD accepted 11 of those because they were for physical, tangible objects. And they denied what Bigelow and his team really wanted to go after, which were the 3 that were based more on a consciousness level, or what's occurring that is not a tangible object, that are these light objects, or that physics, this matter and energy just can't provide an answer for. And we're seeing around the world a lot of these UAP that appear to be like these light orbs, or they're presenting plasma effects that burn people. They later come down with cancer and die within weeks or months of having come into contact with this. And that in and of itself is not just scary for an individual, but for the government. Because when you look at it, if we're talking about an adversary having this type of potential weaponry and or craft, we're screwed. From a defensive posture, we can't accomplish what we're seeing. And all around the world, that's scaring the heck out of a lot of governments.
Yeah, I was going to play devil's advocate here, but you opened the door, and I suppose we can't 100% rule out it's not our own government doing this, certainly others. And I will certainly agree with you, James, what you said there at the end. If it is another country, one of our, not so friendly neighbors out there that has this technology, and are flying these things not only in circles around us, but in all different kinds of ways, that is scary. Or if it's from somewhere outside our planet, even our solar system, that is very disconcerting at the same time. And Ray, before we go on, when you were in the FBI, when you came to visit us in Quantico, didn't you ever stop by the X-Files unit?
I'm sure it was on the 13th floor.
Okay.
But, here's the thing is, with all these things going on, how many times do you run into a hoax or a misinterpretation of one of these UAPs that isn't really what it is? It's just someone trying to make a name.
Yeah, it happens a lot. Or, I misinterpret the data, and I've been wrong many times. Or what I believe is occurring ends up being changed and going down a different avenue. That occurs quite a bit. You have a lot of people, especially with AI now and the way that you can create a video. I just don't believe anything that I see. And the other thing that we do need to talk about is, even with what the federal government is showing, the infrared and ultraviolet technology that we have available to us produces a lot of artifacts. So in and of itself is creating what looks anomalous, and it really isn't. It's just that it can't capture the artifact being seen in the sky without having to move in and out or re-steady itself or change into a different frequency spectrum. And that creates the artifacts itself that look like an anomaly. Or when they stop moving and they've been following an object, the object continues and it looks like it's traveling at tremendous speed, but it's not. It's just that the infrared or the thermal camera stopped moving with it. So we're creating the artifacts ourselves. So whether that be on purpose or just accidentally, that is an issue. And then one thing that I want to talk about too is in all of this, a lot of people think that the reason why everything is top secret and classified is because of the UAP itself, but it's not. People forget that the technology being used to capture this is what's classified. We have color camera systems now that we don't want the enemy to know about. So most of what was classified and being dumped is old technology that the Chinese or whoever know about. And we're worried about keeping that ability to stay on top of the enemy classified and secret.
Interesting. Really interesting.
James, what do you know? And this has been not I don't think theorized is the right word, but this has been mentioned over the decades that had seen some of these then UFOs, now UAPs, focused on our nuclear weapons sites. And that goes back to Roswell in the late 1940s, or at least in that general area. Now, of course, there's Area 51, in I believe that's in Nevada. But a lot of these sightings, at least the ones that have been publicized, have been around these nuclear facilities. And of course, the nuclear bomb was developed in the early 1940s, and of course dropped in Japan in 1945. What do you know about those sightings? Coincidence, not coincidence?
Yeah, I don't think it's coincidence. It's really interesting when you discuss the fact that the mid-1940s, we're looking at the time when the nuclear bomb started being tested, that suddenly all this activity occurred. And we got to ask ourselves, why is that? And then we come to find out that like at Malmstrom Air Force Base, these unidentified anomalous phenomena came over the base and were able to turn off the nuclear weapons. And we've had individuals from the Air Force now coming out and talking about that. And the same things happened at Vandenberg Air Force Base, where there's many missiles ready on the launch sites. So I don't think it's a coincidence. I think something, whether that's a non-human intelligence or some other government, is extremely interested with that. And look at when the phenomena really started taking effect in our culture and our society was right around 1945, 46. We started seeing a lot of these UFOs occurring.
And Hollywood started making movies around that same time. Interesting.
Exactly.
About this.
Well, let me ask you this, James. What is the most compelling physical evidence that you've encountered that still lacks a proper explanation as far as you're concerned?
Sure. So there's one event at Skinwalker Ranch in northeastern Utah, and unfortunately, I'm under a non-disclosure agreement. So I can't talk about that one event. But just south of the ranch, I've had two other events occur that I just don't know what to make of it. One was with a UAP. It was a light orb that it changed from one color into an orange before imploding on itself. I had used a radar gun. With the use of the Doppler effect, it returned that it was traveling between 11 and 44 miles per hour. So that made me initially believe that it was a solid object. But then when it had imploded and disappeared, that was a light phenomena. So I don't know where to go with that. The data points and the data set that I collected don't make sense. And then on that same location, there was a 9,500 pound metal shipping container that was picked up and moved from parallel to a house next to it to perpendicular, and it was 1.5 inches away from going through the house. And that in and of itself is a geomagnetic anomaly that starts pitting us into things that go into magnetic reconnection and electron diffusion regions, or what people know as portals and portal events. So those two separate occurrences happened at the same location just south of Skinwalker Ranch. And then unfortunately, I just can't go into the big one that occurred at the ranch.
I mean, we can get down into the weeds a little bit. Ray asked about, maybe some hoaxes out there, but there have been, to me, unresolved issues, or I should say answers anyway, regarding a lot of cattle mutilation over the last 25, 30 years. For maybe 50, 60 years, people have been reported, always seems to be in like a very, rural area, but they've been actually taken, into capsules somewhere and examined and then let go, and they swear, this really happened. There's been some hoaxers, I think, that have been uncovered. Others, to their dying day, they stuck with it. Do you tie any of this into anything else going back to the younger Dryas, 12,200 years ago, but up to the current day, and with some kind of an explanation linked, associated with one another? How would you tie these factors together, if at all?
Sure, Fitz. So I don't look into that phenomenon a lot. However, when you are discussing the way that these cattle mutilations have occurred, the locations, and when we're starting to now see what these government entities, these sub blocks under the DOD or the DOE or DARPA were doing, I'm starting to think that they were monitoring something that was in use and being tested in the area, whether that was some type of nuclear event or chemical event. I believe that the federal government was collecting samples, and people go, why the hell would the federal government need to do something like that? They can just take the animal and do it elsewhere. But remember, what greater way to cover up higher technology than to create some type of storyline that makes people think it was alien in effect, whether that be some type of advanced craft that we have or some type of weapon system that we're using. That event would just scare the heck out of people and totally shift where their thought is on what's occurring from the federal government. So that's what I personally believe. When you look at where these are occurring, they always seem to be near military sites, or where we know that there were military conducting some type of program or some type of operation prior to these occurring.
And as far as people being possibly taken into spacecraft or hovering craft of some sort, have you interviewed any of those folks? Or I'm sure you've seen some of their interviews.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few of them. I've talked with people like that. And the only thing I can say is, to that individual, they really truly believe something occurred. And what that is, I don't know. And again, there's just so much detail, but it's always, it's either hearsay, it's from a second party, or the individuals themselves with the event. There's just no physical evidence that can be followed up on it. And it's hard for me to be able to put that into my data sets. But I absolutely believe that something occurred to them, and it was a tragic event. And I believe that something was there or was collected to tie it to, alien race or some other entity. I don't know.
And I respect you taking the empirical and objective perspective. That would be more or less qualitative, talking to the folks who claim they were taken up. And I'm not denying, what at least some of them may have experienced, but you're sticking with the hard data from electronic evidence that you have. And of course, some, interviews with pilots, et cetera, and the historical elements you brought into it, looking at different parts of our prehistoric ancestors and what they drew on the cave walls.
Yeah, James, along with the release of this UAP documentation and information, there's been a parallel story that's been running, and Jim and I have spoken about this on other podcasts, and that's the disappearance of individuals or scientists that are tied into maybe some of these UAPs or investigation into nuclear energy or things of that nature. Do you have any position on that, James?
Yeah, so here's where it gets, there's a possibility that these people were important to outside groups, whether that be a different government agency or a private contracting agency. Their data and just their ability is important. So were they taken? It's very possible. And then the other aspect that I mentioned lightly at the beginning of this podcast was In the last 6 months, what BAST, the Bigelow Advanced Aerospace Group, was looking at was consciousness and this non-human intelligence. And it doesn't necessarily have to be aliens from outer space. Maybe what's occurring is some type of manipulation of a portal event. And in physics, we've recently, I think there was a Nobel Prize won 2 or 3 years ago back on this theory, this quantum theory, that there's 5 dimensions, and the bulk of everything is in a 5th dimension. And to be able to control that through multiple physics lattices would give a non-human intelligence an upper hand with us, with being able to go in and out of our 3D world. And we talk about, like, there's the famous docuseries 411, where people go into these national parks and, they're with their father hunting. He looks over to the right and the grandfather or the father is gone. Or you have 3-year-old children that within an 11-hour period are capable of traveling 15 miles. How is that possible on their own? Or you find human remains that have been cut off at the Tib-Fib area, and they look like they've been burned. And again, you're talking about a plasma event or some type of event. So I'm not going to rule out anything. I would love to say it's 100% science, but recently there may be something to it that's outside of what we believe is normal and what a lot of people now label as paranormal. Or like what I said, it's this supernatural or this religious belief system in the past is now what we consider paranormal.
James,
let me ask you this as a follow-up to that. With what you just said, what's the strangest thing you've ever witnessed in the field?
Again, that would have to be what's occurring with these magnetic anomalies and electromagnetic anomalies in and around the Uinta Basin and the Uinta Mountains. I don't know what to make of it. It's a transient energy. When I use a magnetometer and I'm taking a reading, at one moment, there appears to be a void, a large void underneath, and then the next moment, a massive ferrous material. And that's impossible. It can't occur in the same spot, yet it does over and over in the same spots. And then we have 9,500-pound metal shipping containers being picked up, and we looked for any possible way, including helicopter, for it to be moved. And it just didn't, and it fits in. The back end of that shipping container was magnetized for approximately 40 hours. And we see from looking at the old Skinwalker Ranch detail from the Bigelow period that they had the same thing occurring on the ranch, with the cattle fencing being found to be magnetized for a while after an event occurred. So
I understand you mentioned the missing and people found dead in the national parks in the U.S. And there's some people looking into that, and the national park system is very hesitant of turning over their files to even sworn law enforcement, I understand, from different agencies. And there's at least a dozen, if not more, missing. And people die in national parks and go missing all the time. We're not denying that. But it seems like there's a proactive effort by the National Park Service to keep investigators from looking into some of these. And so, Ray and I can say, well, there's either a serial killer out there doing something like this, which would allow the books should be open for that reason, or if there's something else out there, well, maybe that's why they don't want these books being open. And I'm not trying to, foster any, more conspiracy theories here, but you'd think that there'd be some way they would at least release some of these investigative reports. But even I understand that there are people who make these requests, these FOIA requests, are not just being told no, but hell no, and you'll never get these files. And okay, what's the whole reason behind that? And I'm going to throw a question to Ray. James, Ray asked you if your strangest experience, what you've seen, witnessed. Ray, are you willing to tell the audience your UFO or UAP experience?
Yeah, now I'll get a response from you on this, James. When I graduated college, I had a friend of mine who lived in the Carlisle, Pennsylvania area, and he was a school teacher at the time. And we both played college football together. And we were out getting something to eat and had a few drinks but not to the point, because we were driving, so not to the point where we were inebriated, but we're coming back to his place that he was renting, and we're going through there's a lot of, you would call them hills, not mountains, but for Pennsylvania, they're mountains. And we saw a green orb in the sky that kind of went down behind one of the mountains. And we both looked at each other, and I said, "Did you see that?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "Did you see it?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "We can't tell anybody about this." And we never did, other than I told Jim one time when we were getting ready for this. But it was a green orb. And this was back in 1970, 1980, 1979, 1980. So it's 46 years ago, which is a long time ago. So I have no idea what it was, but there's no Air Force base, there's no airport, there's nothing. There were no drones at that time. So this is 1980. So you're thinking, what's going on? And I know my friend that was with me listens to this. So I know he's listening going, that's me, but that's the type of thing that we were sitting there, and I'm thinking, I don't know if other people have reported things similar to that, but I never knew what that was. Never had any idea.
Well, let me throw this out. If the pilot of that green orb is listening to this, please contact Cold Red. We'd love to interview you.
Very much
right,
so.
Ray? Yeah, and again, going back a little bit, James, what you were saying, it's very clear we can't look at these anomalies, these now, I think, demonstrably proven, unexplained phenomenon, in the air, in the water, whatever. There's something that at least the government isn't explaining so far. And as I said early on, these are not being propelled by jet engines. These are not being, they're saying even like magnetic, sort of propulsion systems or atomic energy propulsion, the way they're zigging and zagging, stopping, cutting back and forth, they say it just defies logic, certainly human logic at this point in time. And if it's us, our country, I guess that's okay. If it's some other country, we better be very careful. And of course, if it's from out of this world, well, we better be conscious of that too. But the portal aspect that you mentioned, I think we have to look at the whole time-space continuum aspect of the world in which we live a bit differently now. And I'm by no means a physicist or have an expertise in this, but I've read some of the documents and some of the articles and watched a few specials on this, that there are dimensions of which we just really can't explain, and we really don't fully understand anyway. And that could be the source of what we're seeing now, some interdimensional travel of some sort. Whether our folks have figured out how to do that or someone else, but it definitely makes one ask a lot of questions in that regard. Can I ask you, you were at a symposium in Palm Springs in the last month.
Yes.
What did they call that? And I'm just curious, who were some of the speakers there and topics? And I have to ask this, was there cosplaying? Are there some green people walking around? Or is this for serious-minded folks?
Sure. So it was Contact in the Desert out in the Palm Springs area. And you had people like retired Admiral Gallaudet there speaking. You've had other people like at these same type of symposiums, if not like Colonel John Alexander. You're talking about legitimate people. There was an analyst from the Department of Defense there that was speaking about the UAP dumps. And she was actually the one talking about it's not the UAP itself that's classified, it's the technology tracking it that's classified. And I mean, you'll always get some people that are in cosplay, but you get a group of people that are there for the science, and you get a group of the people that are there for the consciousness aspect of the phenomena that's occurring. And I see the two as one and the same. In the last 6 months, from what I have been seeing and what's been taking place, I think everything is part of the same energy. Whether that energy is creating the phenomena or attracting it is another data set that needs to be collected, and I don't have the answer to. But yeah, Contact in the Desert, they're trying to make it a lot more scientific. You have a lot of DOD, DOE representatives there. Most of them are retired. Some are still in the military. I know that you had the individual, and I didn't find out until I left, that talked about the 2003 event from Vandenberg. He actually spoke there at the same conference, and I just wasn't aware because I had such a busy schedule. I was never able to get hold of him and talk to him in more detail about it.
You know, I'm sure there's been times where you've seen things and you've been in places and you found yourself thinking, this definitely wasn't covered in police academy training. I could see your face, some things you see, and you go, what the heck is going on? But here's a fun question. In all the places you've been, what's more dangerous? The ancient caves, the rattlesnakes, the television producers, or the internet skeptics?
Or a podcast host.
Or a podcast host, yeah. I want to clue us there, Jim.
Sure. I think if you put them all together, it's a snowball fight waiting to happen, you know?
Yeah.
You're always going to get television is there to sell commercial time. And people have to remember that if you were with me as I collected 1,200 data points on the Uinta Basin, you would have tuned out in about 2 minutes because that's all you would have been able to take. And what television is allowing is for these events or type of talk to even exist because it's the only way to make it available for the general public. And I always tell people you need to look at what's being presented to you and take from it what you will. And then go do your own research and look into it more. Because of course there's going to be some stuff that's made spectacular so that, the show can continue. Or something, they always tell me, I'm an anthropologist at heart, so I never stop digging, and I'll find something, and the producers start yelling at me because they tell me that if you didn't find it on camera, it didn't happen. So then they get all heated, and then there's this discussion, I'll say, that takes place between myself and the producers, So there's a lot of moving parts to it, but it allows and affords the opportunity to the general public to see places like Skinwalker Ranch that would have never, people didn't even know it was around because it was so top secret 15 years ago, 20 years ago, So it's a give and take.
Have you ever found something so strange or made a discovery of something so strange that you were afraid to tell anyone about it because it sounded or it seemed ridiculous?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was in Cozumel, Mexico in the early 2000s doing my field work, I found an artifact below the virgin soil at about 15 centimeters below that, which is about 5.91 inches, of a face that does not look like a Maya artifact. As a matter of fact, it doesn't look like anything other than what we would now interpret as a gray alien or some type of alien that we see in the movies. And I know provenience and provenance. Provenience, I pulled it out of the ground at the site location, and it's been in my care, custody, and control. It's never left. The Mexican government doesn't believe it to be a true artifact. So it doesn't fall under the artifact law of 1972. I was able to keep it because of that. And I don't know what to make of it. It's always been one of those deciding factors in me leaving private investigations to investigate, the paranormal. And we're keeping into topics, I think more in the UAP sense, but there's been paranormal events. I recently joined a group called the UAP PD, where they're retired police officers that have body cam footage and CCTV footage of a poltergeist event occurring at a high school where the poltergeist itself dialed 911. And you could watch this on CCTV, and then it pushes two of the officers out of the way. So, we're talking about some type of energy that's able to present itself in many forms. And again, whether it creates or attracts, we're seeing a lot of different phenomena coming from this energy.
The poltergeist pushing the officers out of the way, was that to help them or hurt them?
I think it was to get away from them. Whatever it was, it pushed through to get out of the room that they had entered.
James, as our audience knows, I'm a linguist, a forensic linguist. And ever since I watched Star Trek as a kid, before, of course, I was a linguist, I was always amazed when they'd come into another planet. They'd beam down, and coincidentally, they could always breathe. It was exact oxygen, rate that they could breathe. And they also had these handy devices that helped them translate languages, the alien languages, to English, conveniently for those of us watching Star Trek in English. But I was I travel in linguistic circles, and you probably know this, but there's a term called xenolinguistics, and it is actually the study of human language, but dedicated to the study of alien languages. And the movie Arrival, I believe Amy Adams, the actress, portrayed a linguist in that, and it was very interesting how language there was presented more or less. And you can watch the movie without me trying to explain it. But I will give a shout out here to someone I know pretty well. My wife, Natalie Schilling, is a linguist, retired out of Georgetown, and she just wrote an article for Psychology Today. It was published on April 7th, called Exploring Extraterrestrial Language, what alien languages might be like and why should we care. And I don't have to go too much into that, but it's online if you want to check that out. And it really, they could, aliens, it'll be a language form that may be nothing like that which we're using right now. It could involve odors, telepathy, some other, dimensional aspect that we don't know anything about. So it would be interesting. There is finally some sort of a sighting, some sort of a one-on-one interaction. How do we communicate with these folks? I'm not trying to put all this on you, James, but it's a question out there that I hope some people in the physics world and the linguistics world are looking into.
Yeah, they always say it comes back to mathematics, but I mean, we even got to your point, are they organic that we understand? I mean, could they be silicon based? I think there was a movie recently where the alien was a rock, if I heard correctly. So what our belief system is may be completely different than what reality is, and where they originate from. I have a lot of issues with anything coming from deep space. It's just too vast of an area to travel unless you're using some type of electron diffusion technology. And that other place is more what I believe, like, I guess people would consider it interdimensional, is probably just the easiest way to label it.
You said some of these things are the rock. I'm thinking first thing I thought about was Dwayne Johnson. He's the rock, right?
Right.
But I know that's not
alien.
Maybe it is. I don't know. But anyways, I know that they've, in some of the space stations and some of the astronauts that have been in space have actually said they've seen things in space that have orbited around them or passed by them that were something that they would call UAPs or UFOs. They were not able to identify. Are you familiar with that stuff at all?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the first data dump on May 8th involved the Apollo 12 and 17 mission, and what you're talking about, a lot of it was the release from those two flights. And I think most of what was occurring was space phenomenon. There's just a lot that we don't understand. We have this wonderful, amazing atmosphere that allows us to be on this planet. And space has a whole different environment that we just don't quite understand. We haven't spent enough time out there. And the amount of time that we have spent is less than 244,000 miles away from our planet. So what's coming at us? We have these CME events that are occurring from the sun, massive amounts of energy. NASA has 4 satellites above the Earth that is looking into electron diffusion regions, which is a portal from the sun to about 240,000 miles before the Earth, where these portal events are happening. And sometimes they're a fraction of a second, other times they last for minutes. And we're seeing this magnetic separation and reconnection occurring. So we understand the physics, but we can't mimic it and we don't know how to use it. But the events are real. We have this. So who's not to say that things like that are happening inside the planet like they are out in space? And what those astronauts saw, maybe some of it really was something else out there. But I think a lot of it, when you look at the data dump, was just a lot of natural phenomena that occurs out in space.
Well, from investigator to investigator, James, what's your gut telling you? Are these sightings and this information that you're uncovering, is it trying to tell us something, or are we trying to tell ourselves something through them?
Yeah, I think a lot of us want or hope for something else out there. some difference from our day-to-day life. And I think a lot of what we're seeing, the physical, tangible objects, I think are ours. I think a majority of it is our governments or other governments around the world. But that doesn't mean all of them are. And I think some more of this misunderstood light phenomena, like the orb that you saw, if it wasn't a tangible object, what was it? What was it doing here? Why was it here? And where did it come from and where did it go?
Ray, do you want to do some audience questions? Winding up here?
Well, I have one more question.
You'll be our first audience member. Go ahead.
The producer just reached out to me and he said that an extraterrestrial just landed in the Cold Red studio. And he's agreed to answer one question. So, James, what would that question be? What would you ask him first or it first?
Yeah. How was it able to get to us?
How was it able to get to us? That's what you would ask them first? That's a good question.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
I'd be tempted. Why are you here?
Jim, I ask you that all the time, why you're here.
I had my almost 9-year-old and almost 7-year-old granddaughters a few weeks ago, and we sat down and put on the original early 1950s, The Day the Earth Stood Still. And because they've heard of, space people and, flying saucers. And if people out there are young or have not seen that movie, it's black and white, and it's dated in some ways. But I think James, I'm sure you've seen it over the years. I think there was a later version, perhaps with Keanu Reeves. I guess you can watch that too. But it asks some interesting questions. And of course, the space person comes out looking very human. The special effects weren't as great back in the 50s, so they really didn't have any choice. But, and of course, our military overreacts, gets shot, and I won't give the whole story away. But then he meets with world leaders and scientists, and it just becomes a very interesting story. And they actually made the world stand still for a few minutes to prove that they were legit. Then, of course, there's a Twilight Zone episode, To Serve Man. Do you remember that one, James?
Believe so.
All I'll say was the book. There was a book they gave the humans to serve man, the aliens who came. And if you go on and you can watch the old Twilight Zone episodes, it's a very twisted and surprise ending, what they mean by to serve man. So check that out too. Again, one of the many, many movies, and of course, science fiction books involving our interaction someday with extraterrestrials from somewhere else out there.
Our producers just sent a couple of questions and the first question is, what piece of evidence has changed your mind the most and why?
Yeah, I'm going to have to say with this magnetic anomalies that are taking place in the Uinta Basin and the fact that I looked for a couple days on how 9,500 pounds could be lifted, looked for tracks, looked for some type of excavator, backhoe, helicopter, talked to everybody we could. And for that to occur and to line up with, in a north-south way and to understand how exactly what I'm looking for with these portal events and how it would be a controlled area, it sat it down 1.5 inches away from the other building. That's probably just one of the best pieces of evidence that I've seen. And it's also next to that magnetometer site where I had that transient energy occurring where at one point it was a huge void and then it was massive ferrous material below my feet. So, and I forgot to tell you too, lightning had struck and totally destroyed a house in the same spot and an RV a year before. So now we know we had that amount of energy in the location. So the story can continue. It goes on just what has occurred in this area. And remember, phenomena has no boundaries, so it doesn't know to stop at the Skinwalker Ranch fence line. It's all over the place.
Well, if the phenomena is real, what is the strongest argument against your own conclusions?
Yeah. Again, I've collected data and presented it, and I found out that I was just completely wrong. It's interpreting the data. a lot of times I don't know how to interpret it because there's just nothing to look at quite like it. And then sometimes I personally, you jump to conclusions because you get excited or you're hoping for something to be what you're hoping for, and you misinterpret the data or you don't give it the full time that's required and you miss something. And you go back and have to eat crow later, which is what it is. I mean, it's a part of science is everything's constantly changing, and what's right today isn't right tomorrow. And what was unknown today is known tomorrow. So it's just a misinterpretation of the data, and sometimes maybe just hoping it to be something that it's not.
Jim, you want to take one of the questions? Do you have them?
Yeah, I'll start with Sarah from San Diego. James, she wants to ask you, when looking at petroglyphs that seem to depict modern UAPs or non-human entities, how do you distinguish a literal recording of an event from symbolic art? I think that's a good question.
Yeah. And here I always tell people it's completely subjective. The only person that knows what that is the person who created it, the artist. However, there is one thing working to our advantage is if we start seeing the same anthropomorphic, zoomorphic, or abstract features in a localized area a lot, and we're seeing the same symbols together, that gives us a better chance or opportunity of believing that that event or object was available to multiple people in the area to be able to continuously be putting it into the rock art. So, but what it was or what it is, I don't know. And anybody that tells you they know exactly what it is, they just don't. It's subjective.
And James, I would also add, and I mean, disagree if you'd like, but if it's, you said in that area, multiple petroglyphs, but how about also in other parts of the world that resemble them? To me, that would strengthen the argument too, that they were not just symbolic art.
Sure. And then you can look at that two ways. As humans, our brains all work the same. So even with pyramids, we're going to create whatever it is, we're going to do it at some point in time because that's how we're wired. But the other argument to what you're saying is maybe we had these cultures and civilizations in the past that weren't localized. They were worldwide. And due to catastrophic events, we've lost that knowledge and that history. So either or could be right. And, until we find the smoking gun, that artifact or that historical data that proves either way, it could go either way.
And that demarcation line to what you just said seems to be about 12,200 years ago with this younger Dryas, in terms of if there was another civilization that, or plural civilizations that were traveling, worldwide, and then something changed all that and much of humanity disappeared, that could possibly explain some of what we're discussing here. So yeah, it's a fascinating element. You have another, at least one more guest
one more
question.
We'll go one more here. James, what do you believe will be publicly confirmed within the next 10 years that sounds unbelievable today?
Yeah, I think this non-human intelligence, I think there's something to it. In the last 6 months, I've had 2 events occur where I still am perplexed as to how it's possible without there just being something else that I don't understand, an event from elsewhere occurring. And people say, you can talk about all the physics behind a portal event and it's possible. We always have to wonder, where does gravity go? Why is it weak close but so strong from far away unless it's being pulled elsewhere and it's stronger somewhere else other than 3D? So it's going to be that I think we're going to come into contact with something that's not from out in space. I think it was always here, or it's here just in a different time and space. And I think that's just the easiest way to explain it.
Here's one question that I have, and then I'll turn it over to Jim. If there was one thing that you could tell the audience to stop believing immediately, what would it be?
What the U.S. government is telling us. If you look at all the video and everything, it's just a bunch of objects in the sky that you can tell what they are, and they just look really cool, and we're just not going to get what we expect from them. It's going to have to be given to us some other way. That information is going to have to be divulged from somewhere where we don't expect, maybe directly from whatever that NHI is.
Well, if there is some government worker, we'll say retired, so you can keep your pension and your benefits, that knows something about this and would like to come and talk to us more about this, involved in some of these agencies or sub-agencies or NGOs or whomever that have been exploring and investigating these phenomenon over, I mean, you could say, 3/4 of a century now. I guess Roswell, is that 1948 or 1949? The alleged crash of a spacecraft that was allegedly with a creature of some sort being on board that was somehow taken and hidden. It was first said to be a weather balloon. I think they changed that years later, but no one's ever, of course, acknowledged what it could have been. But that seems to be when all this started. Again, we talked about earlier, coincidentally, at the dawn of the nuclear age, and here we are now. So still asking questions and really no lock solid answers at this point. I think some of the theories and hypotheses have more meat to them now, and with work that folks like you, James, have been doing over the last decade plus. Let's see if we get this out there. And again, it's Ray, as you and I know, it's tough for some government workers to keep secrets. Usually stuff comes out, which a lot of these conspiracy theories, going back to JFK assassination, other things, it's like you think someone would come out and have written a book, gone on Oprah or some other show to get their point across, but maybe it's so super top secret with that their lips are sealed and nothing is coming out. But let's hope someday through official government channels, this president or some other one says, folks, here's what you've been waiting for, and I think it's time that our fellow Earthlings are educated about what is going on out there. So, Ray, any final words? And I'll and we're going to get James too. Why don't you walk James through that? Anything he wants to talk about? Or
yeah, James, I just want to thank you. I mean, I'm kind of enthralled with this, and I've really been wide-eyed to this, and there's things I picked up here that I never knew before. Your information and what you share with our audience, although it was limited because you're not allowed to say some things, I just thought was fascinating, and thank you for that.
Thank you.
And what we'd like you to do is go through, if you have websites, if you have a book that you'd like to talk to, something you'd like to plug, a show that you're on that you want to plug, any of those things, please do that for us.
Sure. I do have a YouTube site where you can, I get into greater detail on a lot of the paranormal and the UAP and these people of great stature in history that have been lost. And it's James Keenan Giants and Paranormal is the site. And the other thing is we have Phenomicon in September, the same week of Labor Day. And that's in Vernal, Utah. And it's a lot of the Skinwalker Ranch team, the Mystery of Blind Frog Ranch, which is the show that I'm on currently. But you have people like Dr. Travis Taylor, who has worked for NASA and now works for a private contractor that works for NASA. You have people like Avi Loeb that have been there before. So you have real scientists. And then always remember, it's not always just the scientists that we have to start listening to. I think we need to melt together both aspects of this consciousness or this non-human intelligence with the science. And that's when we're going to start understanding the answers. And new technology is going to start coming out that's going to start showing people what's really available and around us. And it may scare some people.
Well, folks, if you're scared, continue to listen to me and Ray on Cold Red, and we'll get you through it. Right, Ray?
If you really want to get scared, just look at Jim in the video portion of it.
There you go. At least I speak xenolinguistics, Ray. All right, I'll do my best
Jim.
to keep you out of trouble. James, seriously, on the ending note here, thank you for coming on board. I did a ditto to what Ray said. Appreciate the work you're doing there. Let's see in a year or so, some other stuff comes out. Get you back on, and you can.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. We'll definitely get an update on our on whatever these things are happening around us. Everyone, again, subscribe to Cold Red Podcast and follow us on all Cold Red Podcast social media platforms. Check out our blog at coldredpodcast.com. Thanks to our producers, Matt McLaughlin, Matt Robinson, music coordinator Rick Schilling, and Stay safe and be aware of your surroundings. It might just save a life. And we will see you next time on Cold Red. Good night, folks.